Hello everybody and welcome back to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. I'm your host Ari Stamatakos, and today we're here with our final episode of our new mini-series, The Scouting Centre, where we cover through all of Australia's first three group games from a tactical and analytical perspective. As you can tell from the first two episodes, France and Tunisia, we're going to be moving on to Australia's final group game against Denmark. So without further ado, let's get into it. So when we take a look at Denmark from a tactical perspective, what we can see is something very similar to what we saw in the France video. And obviously, this is the fact that both teams are able to switch very quickly between two different systems. Very similar to how France like to switch between a 4-2-3-1 and a 3-4-1-2. Denmark like to do something very, very similar. Their main system and the system that they'll probably go with heading into the tournament will be a 4-2-3-1. However, they have played a 3-4-2-1 as well, especially in the European Championships. They wanted to start, and they did start their first game in a 4-2-3-1. However, with the unfortunate incident that occurred with Christian Eriksen, this forced a system change where they moved to the three at the back system, and they carried that all throughout the tournament, and they did carry that to the majority of their games in the most recent UEFA Nations League campaign. With that saying, however, they have toyed with the 4-2-3-1 system as well within that UEFA Nations League campaign. So I think it's best we touch on both systems. So let's start with the 3-4-2-1. Now, the 3-4-2-1 in build-up is something that is pretty traditional with how you would expect a 4-3-2-1 to set up. In the initial stages of build-up play, the double pivot in midfield, which is something that Denmark pride themselves on, a very strong double pivot. They like to sit very close together and slightly deeper than potentially what you may expect from a double pivot that don't play with an attacking midfielder or with a true defensive midfielder. The back three sit in a clear structure, not too wide but not too narrow. This offers multiple passing triangles or multiple passing lanes alongside the double pivot where they can really interchange play and really maintain possession in a well thought out and well structured way. I like to progress the ball through the middle of the park first, obviously with those five players in that more central area. This is where they like to do the majority of their build-up play, especially in the first phase, before they advance the ball up into the middle third of the pitch. That's when they like to move the ball out wide to their more attacking, more flair players. Now, one of the double pivot, normally Pierre-Emil Højbjerg, who is the main player for this Denmark team, will drop slightly deeper to collect the ball and will be the more main playmaker in that double pivot. However, both of them generally do like to sit quite deep. In their initial stages of build-up play, the wingbacks like to sit relatively narrow, starting just ahead of the midfielder that is dropping slightly deeper and in line with that midfielder that is sitting slightly further up. Once the build-up play advances into the final stages, they like to join the attack in as much as possible with either overlapping runs or inverted runs through next to the striker and in between the striker and the winger, I should say. Now, when we take a look at that front three, it is very fluid more often than not. This obviously allows for them to be really interchangeable and obviously mix and match positions based on which player is performing best, whether or not they can find a better matchup if they want to isolate a player with another defender and they think they can get the best out of that result. They're very interchangeable, very fluid, and very non-structured front three offers that in spades. Now, obviously, the main difference between some of the players in this team and others is, of course, Christian Eriksen. Now, Christian Eriksen obviously does most of his work in as a number 10, and we'll touch on that when we speak about their 4-2-3-1 system. However, in this system where they don't really play a true number 10 and he isn't defensively minded enough to play in a double pivot, he is slotted into that wide forward position. Now, when he does play in this position, he tends to come slightly central, acting almost like a forward anchor or like a forward fulcrum where the rest of the team build off and make their runs off and then are able to use that playmaking fulcrum to then spring their attacks off from there. This allows the midfield double pivot to take up slightly more advanced positions in the final third, in the final stages of build-up play, because they have that defensive security with Eriksen occupying a more central and slightly deeper area of the pitch in the build-up play. This allows one of the midfield double pivot, normally Thomas Delaney, if he plays alongside Pierre-Emil Højbjerg, to act as almost like an aggressive number 8, occupying those spaces in between the lines and making those forward runs into the box. If Christian Eriksen doesn't play in this wide forward position, the likes of Skov Olsen, Mikkel Damsgaard, Yusuf Poulsen as well, all like to play in those wide forward positions and occupy that role in a very traditional area, liking to maintain their width as well as being able to drop into that half space, occupying a very similar position to how normal wingers would operate in that system. However, something specific with Andreas Skov Olsen, who will be a player to watch heading into this tournament, is that he likes to stick really, really wide on that right-hand side. He likes to hug the touchline, allowing for the right wing back to make those inverted runs into the box and link up with a striker that way. This means that Skov Olsen can maintain that width on the right-hand side, whilst also allowing that wing back to come inside and occupy those half spaces. Them obviously being both interchangeable, both playing on that right-hand side, being able to swap positions in-game where Skov Olsen can drop slightly centrally or can go out wide, and the same can be said for the fullback. This obviously creates a whole different dynamic for the opposition to think about, and also offers a slightly more asymmetrical formation, especially in the final third, as on the left-hand side, more often than not, you will be seeing the wing-back occupying that wide position on the left-hand side, hugging the touchline, where you have the winger on that left-hand side, normally Mikael Damsgaard, coming into a more central area and acting like a second striker or like a left forward rather than a true left winger. So obviously, with this saying, obviously Denmark are a very good team when they play direct, quick-paced football, because they've got those 5 attackers pretty much with the wing-backs joining the front 3. As soon as they turn the ball over, or as soon as they get the turnover, I should say, they look to spring very quickly with those very interchangeable, very fluid front 3. And when they get the play, but being very dynamic, very hectic style, helter-skelter style football, that's when Denmark are most dangerous in this 3-4-2-1 system. So when we look at Denmark without possession in this 3-4-2-1 system, it is, as you would expect, it does sit in a 5 at the back system, obviously with the wing backs coming alongside the 3 centre halves and creating a flat 5 formation. This does like to sit in a 5-4-1 without the ball. It sits in a relatively deep block. I wouldn't call it an out and out low block. I feel like Denmark are a little bit more aggressive and occupy a little bit more advanced areas to call it an out and out low block. However, it does sit slightly more deeper than a mid block and does like to occupy areas maybe just in front of their 18-yard box, especially when the opposition are in their final or even their penultimate stage of build-up play. That's when that's what the areas of the pitch I like to occupy. Obviously, this puts some impotence on Kasper Schmeichel as well, their goalkeeper, to act as that sweeper keeper, to come out and protect that area just behind the back line, to avoid those balls getting in behind, or those balls in between the 3 centre backs and the fullbacks, of course. Now, despite this, they like to hold a lot of depth with their defence, and what that means is, despite sitting relatively deep, they are relatively high and aggressive pressers, especially in the initial stage of the opposition's build-up play. So once the opposition do get the ball, maybe from a goal kick or if they turn the ball over, initially they do like to press really, really intensely, and it is a very, very important part of their defensive system, especially in this early phase of build-up play. They like to press really high, very aggressively, and they like to press in a very organised and structured way. Before, if that press is then beaten, that's when they like to drop back in this 5-4-1 system. However, in that stage of build-up play, their 5 at the back holds its shape and holds its relatively deep line, and it does leave them a little bit stretched. However, with a lot of depth within their defense, it obviously creates for a very tricky way to play out from the back, because if you get through their first layer of press, then of course you've got that double pivot to sort out. If you get through that, then obviously you have that 5 at the back. So they structure it very, very well, and they structure it in a way which allows for, it kind of baits teams into playing out from the back before then. Obviously, they have pressers coming from every single direction to press the ball carrier, as well as cutting off passing lanes through that double pivot and through that defensive back 5. And another aspect of that defensive back 5, which obviously can take up a lot of different forms and a lot of different shapes because of the strength in numbers that they've got, is that if a player, obviously if a striker I should say, likes to step up and engage the play, or the number 10 likes to drift in between the lines, the centre back will go up to that player and engage that player very aggressively and very in an advanced position. So he does step slightly more advanced or slightly more forward of that defensive line, which obviously then transitions back into a back 4. But what that allows that's allowed because of that back 5 at the back system. So if a striker will drop deep to collect the ball, if the number 10 drops in between the lines to collect the ball, a centre back, probably the more central centre back, then obviously the back 4 can slot into a nice back 4, very structured there. Obviously the central centre back will then press forward, will engage that player very aggressively and step up to create almost like a 4-5-1 in defence, or a 4-1-4-1 out of defence in that system. Now, when the ball is wide on one of the flanks, like a really, really wide, tugging the touchline, that assigned wing back, I should say. So if it's on the right hand side, that left wing back will push really high and press really aggressively up to that player and engage engage that player in a very aggressive manner, trying to force them back. And what this allows, it allows for the rest of the defense to slot into a back four with that opposite fullback coming slightly more narrow to then make that back four. And then, of course, if the ball is then transitioned back into the middle, they move back to their five at the back system. And then if the ball is transferred to the other side, then of course that same thing will happen, just vice versa pretty much. So they are very fluid, they are very flexible defensive line, and because of the strength in numbers that they've got, they are very solid defensively. They obviously will have a major, that's something that they will be looking at towards this World Cup. Obviously they are in a group with France, so the likes of Mbappe and Griezmann and Karim Benzema as well will be looking to occupy those spaces in behind, and will be looking to get through that back five. Obviously Denmark have versed France before and have beaten them most recently in their game in the UEFA Nations League, so they are very experienced against coming up against sides with pace and with skill up front as well as size. So they are very adept to defending multiple different systems and multiple different players, and this five at the back system is very, very strong defensively, which just allows their attacking players to flourish when they do get the ball. So like I said at the top of the episode, Denmark do like to float between two different systems and can start the game against Australia in two different systems. Of course, we just covered the 3-4-2-1, and now we're going to move on to the 4-2-3-1. Now, when we take a look at the 4-2-3-1, it does set up in a very traditional way. Of course, the 4-2-3-1 is a system which is very fluid, especially within that midfield three. Obviously, like I said, Christian Eriksen will occupy that number 10 role. He's one of the best in the world at playing as a number 10, so he can drop slightly deeper, being a number 8 and creating a 4-3-3, or it can push on and join the number 9, playing as a shadow striker and create a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-2-2, depending on the system, depending on how Denmark want to try and break the opposition down. But in their initial stages of build-up play, they like to move the ball quickly and directly. This is something that is a little bit different to their way that they play at the 3 at the back system. In their 3 at the back system, they do like to play around with the ball a little bit more, especially in their defensive third. However, in this 4-2-3-1 system, they like to play very directly and very quickly up to the strikers, up to the forwards, who either push very high and create that space in behind for them to occupy, for them to collect the ball, whether that be a long ball through the air or a darting ball along the ground. Or they like to drop deep and collect the ball before being able to turn on a dime in a sense, and then move quickly, very directly, vertically with pace. The aim of their build-up play really is to get the attacking players in the game as quickly as possible. This is a slightly less patient system than their 3 at the back system. They like to force the issue a little bit more and like to be a little bit more direct. Now the wingbacks or the fullbacks in this system are very different to the way that the fullbacks like to play in the 3 at the back system. When Denmark are building up for the back, the fullbacks in this system like to take proactive positions out wide, looking to create space in the central areas for the centre mids to have more time and space on the ball, or allowing space for the wingers to drop slightly deeper to collect the ball. These proactive positions they like to get also give them a chance to try and exploit the space that could be left if the fullback does follow the winger that drops back. This obviously allows for the space in behind for the fullbacks to get. So this is one of the reasons why they take slightly more proactive and slightly more aggressive areas up the pitch. Now, when we take a look at some key aspects of their build-up play, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg and Christian Eriksen are two very, very crucial players in this system. Obviously, like I said when we started this segment, Christian Eriksen likes to play a relatively free role in this number 10. He can drop deep, or something that he likes to do quite a lot is drop deep alongside the central midfield to the central midfielders to make almost like a 4-3-3. With Pierre, this obviously means Pierre-Emile Højbjerg will drop slightly deeper to be as that single pivot holding midfielder that can dictate tempo from there. Now, Eriksen is the slightly more advanced, obviously he's the slightly more advanced midfielder, so he's that forward pivot that likes to drift vertically, pretty much he likes to stay relatively central and can drift forward and back up the pitch, almost acting like an attacking box-to-box midfielder in a sense, almost like a true number 8. Now, obviously Højbjerg sits slightly deeper, he's the deep creator, having a good ability to dictate tempo as well as being able to play a very accurate long pass if needed and if necessary. Højbjerg sits slightly deeper to be that quarterback style player in this Danish build-up play. Now, when in transition and in the final phase of build-up play, the fullbacks are very, very crucial, either making overlapping runs, allowing for the wingers to come inside and be very deadly within that half spaces and making attacking runs towards the 18-yard box, or they do have the license to make inverted runs, penetrating the 18-yard box, allowing the wingers to assume their natural positions positions on that right and left hand side and maintaining the width in attack that way. Now, with the width provided by either player in both phases of the build-up play and in transition, this allows for easy crosses to the back post and diagonal balls because they have that width from either player. This obviously means that they're able to stretch the defense. They're able to stretch the defense, obviously make those gaps in the center quite prominent. And if the defense do like to stay compact and do like to flood that penalty area, those crosses to the back post and those diagonal balls out from the left hand side to the right hand side could be a very, very useful way for Denmark to try and break down teams, especially if they sit in a low block, especially if they sit in quite a compact block. This ability to stretch the defense can make gaps for the forwards in between the lines, or they can obviously just play the ball out wide and they can assume more aggressive and more natural positions in the final third that way. Now, most of their chance creation in this system does come from quick turnovers and counter pressing, meaning that once they get possession of the ball, there may be 4 to 5 seconds once they win that ball from a turnover, they're going to be very, very dangerous and they'll be looking to play direct football at pace. That is obviously something that is prominent in their 3 at the back system, and it's probably even more prominent in this 4-2-3-1 system. So yeah, that is how Denmark like to play when they do have the ball. Let's take a look at how they like to set up defensively in this 4-2-3-1 system. So let's have a look at this Danish team without the ball in their 4-2-3-1 system. And when you take a look at Denmark without the ball, they have 2 very clearly defined systems within their overall defensive structure, if that makes sense. So when the opposition are in their first phase of build-up play, Denmark like to press very intensely and very aggressively using advanced positions high up the pitch. They either set up in a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-2 style press, and with the 4-3-3 obviously being a more natural style of press with their 4-2-3-1 system, obviously Christian Eriksen would then drop alongside that midfield double pivot to create that 4-3-3, those 2 banks of 3 pressing system, which obviously forces teams to try and play in between the lines and try to play more intricate passes, which inherently is a more high risk style of a high risk tactic. Or they could press in a very aggressive 4-2-2 with Christian Eriksen joining the number 9 and the wingers coming slightly more narrow and dropping in pretty much behind the 2 strikers, obviously with Eriksen joining the natural number 9 to create this 4-2-2, very aggressive, very narrow, compact style of press. Now, obviously, the aim of this is to push the teams out wide and push teams out wide and try and get the teams to build up via their fullbacks and via the wide players. Obviously, inherently, that means that they are restricting space for the opposition to build up in, obviously using the byline as their friend and trying to force teams out of play. However, the other main kind of area of this, or the other main aim of this structure, of this pressing structure, is to force teams long. So the defensive line of Denmark, when they are in their first stages of build-up, sits in their structure. They sit in that 4 at the back structure, and they are very resolute. Now, this obviously forces teams, obviously with the high press, this forces teams to try and hit balls long and try and hit balls in behind or just in front of the centre-backs, where they have the aerial and the numbers advantage. That obviously Denmark have the aerial advantage with their centre-backs obviously being very aggressive at times, and obviously they have the numbers advantage with those 4 at the back and even one of the double pivot dropping slightly deeper to create that 5 defensive structure. So this is the main aim of their pressing structure. However, if the opposition are able to break through that pressing structure and advance the ball through into the middle and final third, Denmark like to sit between a 4-5-1 and a 4-1-4-1 in a mid block. It's slightly more advanced if in comparison to their 3 at the back system. However, it isn't totally a high block. They don't press very intensely in their defensive and their middle third. Now, they like to sit very narrow and compact, forcing teams out wide where they can then crowd the box and restrict space in between the lines and for that number 9 to try and play intricate passes within the box. Now, obviously, this is achieved to a very, very good extent because they've got that 5-man or at least their 4-man midfield slightly ahead of them. They obviously drop very deep and are very proactive defensively. The wingers like to press very, very aggressively to those wide players, which means if they get the ball there, they have to try and play that crosses. They have to play their crosses rushed. They have to play their forward structure in a sense. They have to play their forward build-up play very rushed because of that very intensive press from very selective intensive press from those wingers. They do get a lot of numbers back behind the ball, obviously, which allows this more narrow defensive structure due to the extra layer of security, especially out wide, that midfield 5 are given. Obviously, the midfield 3 in this system, obviously, main aim is to cut off passing lanes and try and intercept passes that have tried to play into the feet of the striker or into the feet of the number 10. They aren't really that aggressive. They are very aggressive pressers, those midfield three. Their main role is to cut out passing lanes and is to be very, very resolute. So out of possession, this Denmark team is very, very resolute in obviously out of possession. They like to sit in a very compact style, very aggressive presses initially, but if they do need to, they can suffocate space and really drain the life and try and force teams to try and play that Hollywood pass before they can then get that turnover and use that ball that they do get very directly at pace. Their defensive structure and their offensive structure work in tandem, which just makes them such a dangerous team if they get that turnover. They can then get that turnover and go. This synergy between the out of possession tactic and the in possession tactic makes them one of the best international teams that are currently going around. They have a great run of form. Obviously, the European Championship campaign showed this in spades. So this very flexible, very fluid structure and system, both in possession and out of possession, both with their three at the back and four at the back, makes them a very, very feared opponent, and the Socceroos will need to be on their A game in order to break this defensive structure down. So let's look at a predicted lineup that Denmark could go for their game against Australia. Now, of course, this is their 3-4-2-1 system. Kasper Schmeichel picks himself in goal. He's the number one choice for Denmark. Joachim Andersen, Andreas Christensen, and Simon Kjær. There, once again, three centre-backs have picked themselves. Joachim Mæhle on that left-hand side is a fantastic player. Obviously made his name at the European Championships last year. He's incredible offensively. He has a fantastic goal threat, but he's also improved his defensive game tenfold ever since that tournament. Christiansen on that right-hand side is at this stage the number one choice right wing back for Denmark. However, Daniel Vaz has played there in the past and has played very well, so it is a toss-up between who starts in that position. Thomas Delaney and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg pick themselves in the centre of midfield. They'll be that double pivot for the whole tournament, barring any injuries. They are fantastic players and work really, really well together. On the left-hand side, this is, of course, if Christian Eriksen plays. If Christian Eriksen doesn't play, and if the coach wants to go with a slightly more fluid front line, Mikael Damsgaard should occupy this left-hand side position. Kasper Dolberg up front is Denmark's number 9, and Andreas Skov Olsen is a player that will be on the eyes of a lot of fans heading into this tournament. He will be a fantastic player. He's obviously so fluid, so dynamic, occupies that right-hand side brilliantly, and will be a player to watch in this tournament, no doubt. So yeah, this is how Denmark could line up if they were to occupy or if they were to deploy their 3-4-2-1 system. So let's look at a Danish predicted lineup if they were to go with their 4-2-3-1 system. Now, this is a system that they probably will go with for this World Cup. Of course, Christian Eriksen is back in full form, so he should occupy his main position as that number 10. The back four or the back five stays the same, with Simon Kjær making way for Mikael Damsgaard, who then moves over to the left-hand side. Apart from that, once again, the lineup should remain relatively unchanged. The core of the team is there and the spine of the team is there, just whether or not they move to a 5 or to a 4, which allows for 1 or 2 changes at the absolute maximum. Once again, Christian Eriksen will be their main man in terms of whether or not they will go to this system. If they want to try to get the best out of Eriksen, I think playing him in his true number 10 role is the way to do it, rather than moving him out to the left-hand side where he isn't fully capable or isn't his full natural position, I should say. However, within this system, Eriksen does like to drop deep alongside Thomas Delaney, which allows Højbjerg to drop slightly deeper. So once again, this 4-2-3-1 system can float between a 4-3-3 and its more traditional 4-2-3-1, but yeah, that is the starting 11 that if they were to play this system, Denmark will probably go with for the game against the Socceroos. So as we always do on episodes of this series, let's take a look at Australia's 3 key avenues to getting victory in this game. And the first one is obviously being able to combat Denmark's very, very, very strong midfield. Obviously, Thomas Delaney and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, who we've covered so far on this episode, are very, very good. To put it bluntly, they're very, very good players, and they play in a structure which is fantastically suited to their strengths. Of course, this is complemented by the talents of Christian Eriksen, who can drop slightly deeper or play just ahead of them. This is a very, very solid midfield tandem that they've got, or midfield trio. They are obviously very, very physically capable, can run teams off the park and can bully other teams as well as being able to dictate the tempo and really control the game with the ball. They're so well rounded. They're brilliant. Both are in fine form as well for their club sides. And with Australia know all too well the talents of Christian Eriksen. Of course, he did score that goal back in their clash in 2018. So Australia will need to be absolutely on point with their midfield structure. Whether that means playing someone like a Cam Devlin, maybe if that means playing someone like a Devlin and a Keanu Bacchus, two very defensively minded, two very industrious, very tough tackling defensive midfielders. Maybe it means dropping someone like a Adrian Hustic or moving him out to the right hand side, or maybe it means playing someone like an Aaron Moy or dropping someone like an Aaron Moy, I should say, to try and get more industrious midfielders in this team. I don't know what system Graham Arnold will be looking to go with. You should go off the fact that Australia were able to dominate in the midfield area of the pitch for the games against Peru and the UAE. Jackson Irvine, Hustic, and Moy should be capable enough to play in that midfield three and to really get on top of the Danish midfield, or at least make it a 50-50, a stalemate. So Australia should go into this game with full confidence in that midfield three that has started the majority of their games, that being Jackson Irvine, Aaron Moy, and Adrian Hustic, having the faith and the confidence that they will be able to get the job done against the likes of Delaney, Højbjerg, and Eriksen. Because if they don't, it's going to be a long day for the Socceroos, because that Denmark midfield is able to control any game. If they're given an inch, they'll take a mile. Let's look at Australia's second avenue to victory in this game against Denmark, and that is being mentally switched on. The Danish have an ability to switch and change tactics and switch and change formations at ease, and are very, very capable in a lot of different structures and a lot of different systems. They obviously have so much depth in talent in their attacking third in particular. So Australia needs to be able to understand every single system that the Denmark will probably play or have a chance of playing against Australia, and will be needing to scout every single player to a pretty good level that they might be coming up against. They have so much talent, especially in that front line. Like I said, the depth in talent there is ridiculous. So Australia will need to be switched on to be able to handle every single obstacle that Denmark could throw at them. This also means understanding the weaknesses that Denmark could, or understanding the weaknesses that Denmark have, and being able to exploit this. Now, when you look at the weaknesses, they're different between the 3 at the back system and the 4 at the back system. If we take a look at their 3 at the back system, their main weakness and Australia's main avenue for success in this system is getting on top of that midfield double pivot and restricting restricting service, I should say, for that front three. However, like I have spoken about the talents and the abilities of that double pivot. However, when there's only 2 of them, you can get on top of them. There's only 2 of them, right? So if you get 3 or maybe 4 players in that midfield and hunt them down and press them and tire them out and intimidate them physically, that's the avenues for success the Socceroos will be able to have if Denmark do line up with that midfield double pivot in that 3 at the back system. If they go with the 4 at the back system, trying to press high and counter quickly at pace. That is the main area that the Socceroos will be looking to do for the game against Denmark if they line up in that 4 at the back system. They can leave themselves exposed at the back with only 4 defenders and being very aggressive. Of course, their wing backs push very high, meaning that they'll only have pretty much 4 defenders if you include the 2 centre backs and the 2 midfield double pivot. And even in that system, one of the double pivot will more often than not take up more advanced positions. So if the Socceroos can press high, especially in their midfield third, get the turnover and then go at pace, especially out wide, then that is something that the Socceroos will be looking to do and should be looking to do for to get some success against Denmark if they play that 4 at the back system. But overall, Australia need to be mentally switched on to exploit the weaknesses of Denmark when they're there, because if Denmark are able to get the game on their terms, they'll be very, very hard to break down. So being mentally switched on is something that the Socceroos will be needing to do for this game against Denmark. Now, the third and final avenue for success for the Socceroos in this game is by having a controlled game. Now, what that means is by taking all the sting and taking all the emotion out of the game. Denmark like to play their best football when it's end-to-end, at pace, when it's frantic, when it's helter-skelter style football, with both teams kind of playing all different types of systems, being very fluid. That's when Denmark do most of their damage, because of their pace, creativity and flair and individual brilliance up front. That's where they're able to break most teams down. Australia need to frustrate Denmark in this game. They need to take all sting, take all emotion out of the game, and almost play anti-football at times. The more manic and high tempo it is, the more it just plays into the hands of Denmark, and the more chances that they will be, the more likely they'll be able to break Australia down and get a result that they want. Australia need to be composed and understand where the gaps in Denmark's pressing are in order to maintain the ball and be patient with possession. They can't just play the same way that they played in their first 2 group games. They need to be very careful in possession and be very deliberate deliberate with what they are wanting to do in possession for this game, because if it turns into a end-to-end basketball style game, this just plays into the hands of Denmark and will be very, very suited to the way that Denmark play football. So Australia need to be able to hold possession in this game and not allow Denmark to get the game on their terms. So when we take a look at some potential lineups or a predicted lineup that the Socceroos could go with for this game against Denmark, it is very, very similar to what I showed for the game against Denmark that the Socceroos could go with. There is no personnel change. The only structural difference is that Aaron Moy drops into a slightly more defensive single pivot role, playing just behind Adrian Hustic and Jackson Irvine. This is probably pound for pound Australia's best team if everyone's fully fit and obviously taking into consideration the form of some of the players. This is probably Australia's best team, so there's no real need to change or overcomplicate things against the Denmark team that is not overly good. It's not like one of the best international teams in the world. However, they do pose a lot of threats. So if Australia just play the way that they normally play and play the structure that they normally play the players that they normally play, then they should be able to have a pretty good chance of getting a result from this game. Denmark aren't a side where you need to play a specific lineup for them, like maybe I showed for the game against France. However, yeah, this is a lineup that Australia could go with. Probably pound for pound Australia's best team. Of course, there are some changes. Maybe Karacic replaces Atkinson at right back. Maybe Mitchell Duke makes an appearance up front, or maybe Matt Leckie on the left-hand side. But relatively speaking, this probably will be the lineup that Australia and the Grey Mother will go with for this game against Denmark. So yes, thank you all very much for watching the final video here for the Scouting Centre on the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Leave your predicted lineups, your thoughts on the game, and maybe your predicted scoreline in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. Like the video. See you guys next time, and goodbye.